Yeah, so thanks for joining here today. Some of you might be asking who I am. I'm new with Health Research BC, and I just have been asked to help facilitate and be a gopher for this session, so I don't have much of the content or anything, really just here as a supporter to Laura, who I will now hand over the reins to.
My mic is working. My mic is not working. Oh, maybe there we go. Yeah? Yeah, there we go. It's a slow start. Always slow start with this one. Letting you know, this is actually kind of a funny hybridized model. My colleague Jimena is actually online, and her lovely face will be showing up eventually when our slides pop up as well. But Tansy, hello, my name is Laura. I am a Métis woman from unceded Sinixt territory in Trail, BC. And I'm joining you from an organization called the BC NEIHR. You've heard our name mentioned a couple times today. And we're presenting on some applications of Indigenous cultural safety frameworks in the context of patient-oriented research. And before I pass it over to Jimena, I do just want to note that a lot of the research and structure we're presenting here was done by our amazing colleague, Zoe Verlan, and she has moved on with her career to a different organization, and we miss her, and we're very grateful for her work. So, Jimena, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. Very nice to see you all. My name is Jimena Garcia. I am the Indigenous Health Research Facilitator for Vancouver Island, and I've been preparing also this presentation together with Laura and Zoe Berland. So happy to be transmitting from the unceded territories of the Tsuk Nation, and where I live and enjoy the beautiful sights of the sea and all the creatures that live and surround this place. Thank you, Laura. So today we're gonna, and this is a little bit of the program, we're gonna speak very little about the JEDI as a framework and why it is important to consider cultural safety and humility before JEDI for Indigenous peoples in BC. We are going to also check some relevant Indigenous cultural safety frameworks, and we will have a case analysis where we will play a trivia to then have a discussion about Indigenous cultural safety and how we can apply it to patient-oriented research. Okay, next, Laura. So first of all, talking about JEDI. JEDI is an amazing framework when we are working with multicultural population. And it's great to create environments of social justice in different services, especially in health services, for all people, right? The idea is to be inclusive, to provide the same opportunities to participants, independently of the gender, ethnicity, national origin, age, sexual orientation, gender, education, disabilities, and different situations that one can be facing as a minority group. However, there is also all the theory around intersectionality and how each intersection and how each person leaves the system and experience different areas of the system. And there is where we find as an organization, BC NEIHR, that Indigenous cultural safety is first, because the historical context and the situation that Indigenous peoples are living in these times requires immediate attention. So can you go to the next, Laura, and I pass it to you. Thank you.
Finally figured out I don't have to point the clicker at the screen. I was like, oh, all right, there we go. Thank you, Jimena, for that. So just before we get started here, I just want to point out the opinions shared in this presentation are that which are representing those of the BC NEIHR, our governing board, our elders, all of that. And the frameworks we're touching on too today, they're all coming from work that has been synthesized by Indigenous scholars, healthcare providers, governing bodies, organizations, and more. And we do have a page at the end, a lovely resource page, although I do suspect quite a few of you have seen quite a few of these documents in your time. So we have this statement that we believe that we must apply Indigenous cultural safety frameworks before EDI frameworks when we're working with Indigenous peoples, and that's due to the historical complex historical experiences, right, through colonization. And as a matter of fact, through JIPA and other important policies, we're constitutionally obligated to do so, right, to approach this work with Indigenous peoples with an Indigenous cultural safety lens. All right, so to set some context here, I want to touch on 3 points with you. And that first is, which I don't think will come as a shock to anybody here, Indigenous peoples are facing significant disparities in various levels, various determinants of health as a result of colonization. And colonization itself, it's an ongoing process, and as a result, these impacts are also ongoing. The second point, Indigenous cultures and peoples were multiple and we're very diverse, and therefore we shouldn't be universalized as one, right? There are specific contexts, times, and places where pan-indigeneity, has its value. But when we're talking about the context of healthcare research, and so much more, Indigenous people need to be approached and understood as distinct peoples with distinct cultures, beliefs, understandings, and how we orient ourselves to the world. And that third note I want to touch on, which might be the most important and might also be in spite of point number 1, is it's important to understand and know that Indigenous peoples were brilliant, were strong, and were resilient. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read The Secret Pocketbook. It's a really lovely book. And in it, the author, after sharing her experience of how she survived residential school systems, says, we were geniuses, we are geniuses, and we continue to be geniuses. So it's important to understand this, because as healthcare researchers, I think especially in patient-oriented research, right, where many of you are either healthcare providers or were healthcare providers or are partnered with healthcare providers, I think it's easy to kind of get in that like savior kind of hero mentality, right? And if it's easy for you to see, or you find it's easy to see that there's maybe a problem or an issue or one of these disparities, and you could see maybe what might feel like a simple solution or something, in spite of that, like not everybody's going to be as enthusiastic to address that health issue in the way you want to bring it up, and in the way you see fit. So I've fallen victim to this in a specific context. I'm lucky to have had mentors with me to kind of help me step back gracefully and kind of correct that. So it's just nice to be aware of that. And what I'm hoping you can take from this presentation too is that like the research you're doing, the work you're doing, it's valuable, it's significant in the specific context of what you're researching. But I think there really is the opportunity to create some respectful and reciprocal relationships with Indigenous partners, Indigenous communities, who may be interested in facilitating their own or participating in patient-oriented research, right? We just need to kind of take this approach, not even kind of take this approach, we need to take this approach respectfully. And I'm hoping you can have a couple takeaways here and also see why we are so much like, yes, we love JEDI, JEDI is important, but let's make this little tweak here and take this approach first before we jump into that. And as we talked about too, when I mentioned like our multiplicity and our diversity, each culture and community right now, right, like we're going through diverse stages of recovery. We're going through diverse stages of reconciliation within our own communities and the systems from which, we're operating from. And we're trying to demonstrate and exert independence from colonial systems that have historically and still in contemporary situations continue to undermine our rights and autonomy. And that lovely reminder that Indigenous peoples of Canada, like we're the first people of this country, right? And our lives have been altered through violent colonial processes and maintenance of violent colonial systems. So our experiences with this are distinct, and they aren't equal to other cultures or peoples that are also experiencing oppression in Canada, right? And this has to be addressed, so that Indigenous cultural safety specific lens prior to that conversation about speaking of equity with other minorities and other Canadian individuals too, right? Oh, I have to keep pressing the thing. There we go. So just that refresher, like, what do I mean when I'm talking about Indigenous cultural safety? Well, this brilliant Maori scholar, Irapiti Ramsden, she's a nurse, and she actually coined the term in research from her doctoral dissertation, where she expresses and defines Indigenous cultural safety as this process of explicitly addressing inequitable power relations, racism, as well as the ongoing impacts of historical injustices. And since then, I'm sure you guys have heard this a ton, right? Canada's made this commitment to reconciliation, and we talk a lot about ICS, hence why I'm here today, right? And we've seen this reflected in the calls to action in UNDRIP. For example, we have like TRC call to action number 23, where it quite literally is like, hey, we recommend that all healthcare professionals undergo some type of cultural safety training. And while these key principles, you know, of ICS, they're evolving, as many systems, frameworks, structures do, as we kind of explore the relevance of these applications. In general, our ICS training, right, we're looking at features including like focusing on these power imbalances we have, looking at points of privilege, creating these respectful relationships. You're going to hear a lot about that repeated, really common trend in what we're talking about. Identifying common kind of social justice goals, prompting critical reflexivity, and I'd say humility as well, and affecting change and transformation by action. There we go. So FNHA, through their Anti-Racism, Cultural Safety, and Humility Framework 2022, defines cultural safety in a very similar manner, as you can read up on that screen. But they also talk about these two other concepts, which we hear a lot about, cultural humility and anti-racism. And both of these are, I'd say, pretty important to accompany cultural safety, right? So when we talk about cultural humility, I think of this as like an actual process. It's an action. And everybody was saying this on like TRC Day and everything, you know, what is reconciliation without action? So, and then we hear like coined reconciliation. I love saying that now. It's trendy, right? It gets fun. And this is that process of actually having self-reflection, right? To understand our personal systemic conditioned biases that we've learned from growing up in colonial systems. And as a mixed person, like, I have my own interesting story and journey with that myself, and to develop and maintain respectful processes and relationships built on mutual trust. So again, we're coming back to this idea of relationships and relationship building, and we hear this a lot, especially in the work we do through NEIHR, and just really that value. You can't have that trust without really investing in that relationship with people. And cultural humility, it involves humbly acknowledging ourselves as lifelong learners. So we're never going to become experts in someone else's culture. We're never going to become experts in someone else's life and their lifetime experiences, right? But it's that humble willingness to like engage and continually learning and developing. And anti-racism, another action-oriented word, which I love, that's our practice where we're actively identifying, we're actually challenging, preventing, and really trying to eliminate and change those values, those structures, those policies and programs and practices and behaviors that are perpetuating racism. It's more than just being not racist, but again, it takes that action step, right, with it. Like, okay, you might be like, I'm a non-racist person, you know? But stepping out there and actually doing anti-racism work and trying to contribute to that change and pointing out problems. It is worth noting, though, that the application of all these principles, they don't always result in these like beautiful fantasy environments, right? Like, racism, discrimination, it's constantly changing, like it's presenting in new faces, and we're always kind of doing this work with still wanting that end goal, but trying to shoot for that. So as I said earlier, we are going to present just a few frameworks, but we've touched on just some of the resources here. Again, we have it at the end, but we're we're working from all of these pre-existing documents and frameworks that have been constructed with the idea of creating reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. So here are some of the policies we've pulled from. Like I said, UNDRIP, we've got DRIPA. We've also used some really amazing reports to influence our work, not only in this presentation, but in our lives in general. There's your report that I forget to click. I clearly should have like given this to you and been like, next slide, please. I could actually do it. I'll be like, next slide, please, Ashlyn. Thank you.
I knew I was here for a reason.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so these are the 4 frameworks our NEIHR team decided would be great to touch on. I'm not going to go crazy in depth. I've highlighted some of the key points from it, and what I'm really hoping is that you can see in it is, as much as I've talked about like diversity and like the multiplicity of it all, a lot of these frameworks do have some similarities and are kind of just asking for some similar things before we step into those roles and those interactions. Next slide, please. So as we already mentioned earlier, we gave a look at the FNHA Anti-Racism, Cultural Safety, and Humility Framework. And I've picked out a few of these that I found to be pretty relevant in informing the work that I try to do. So talking about increasing First Nations decision-making, consider First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people input in all of the stages of clinical trials. So we had a question this morning in Amy's amazing session, about, well, what stage should we be involving patient partners, right? And we were all kind of like, well, yes, from the start. It was great. We had a really audible response. They were like, should we do it? And everybody was like, yes. Similar here, right? In an ideal world, like, the perfect solution, I think we'd see Indigenous communities coming forward and reaching out and being like, hey, we've kind of identified this thing. Do you want to collab, or can we connect to your funding, whatever it is, right? But ultimately, they need to be included in all of those stages from the get-go. Improving service delivery through including Indigenous ways of knowing and being. So I like to look at that as that kind of principle of why would you make or offer something for someone when you don't really know anything about them? Like, how do you know it's going to be applicable? If it's not applicable, if it's not relevant, they're not going to use it, right? So making sure that that's suiting the needs of the people who are going to be able to access those services. Promoting and supporting capacity development, both human and economic. I like to say capacity bridging, because I think sometimes with capacity like development or building capacity in that sense, it kind of sounds as if a person is without capacity, and everybody's capacity for different skills, it's very different, right? And when we talk about both human and economic, that's not just, here's an honor area, thank you. It's like, is there opportunity for, are there roles that they can take on, like people can take on with like in the research project that are paid? Are there occupational advantages? And 2, it's also that concept of, okay, I need Indigenous consultation, I want Indigenous representation on this board, on this committee, but am I asking this woman who has like a full-time job and like 5 kids at home in the state of this economy to come and volunteer for 2 hours and not offer like any type of compensation, right? Like, how much do you value the individuals you're working with and the time that they're bringing forward to you? So considerations like that, and then 2 other mentorship opportunities. Some people want to learn some new stuff, right? And learn some new skills. Foster meaningful collaboration and partnership. So again, we're talking about like building quality relationships and what that's going to look like. And if you have agencies and regions, like, are we having connecting the right people with the right people, for lack of better words. And of course, being without prejudice. There's that humility piece, leave your ego at the door, be open to working with different people and hearing what they have to say. And then functioning at a high operational standard. And I really like I should have bolded that one, the innovative governance models, because there's a lot of times where you have projects or you have like specific timelines. And I have a colleague right now, she's doing her PhD like with her own community. And I know this isn't patient-oriented specific, but like she's done so much work and now she's just waiting for her community to take the time to review the project they're gonna do before they go forward. And like, it's been quite an interesting thing to see that go with the university, but she's just like sometimes people have different timelines, right? Like, it's not this very structured. I know we have timelines, reporting, all of that, but sometimes you just got to be flexible with it, right? Oh, next slide, thank you. Yeah, she's following like my body language. It's a very great partnership here. We hung out before this. So we have our principles of OCAP. I am very certain, I'm overconfident in this, but that you've probably all seen this. I do just want to emphasize a few things here, and it's interesting because I've had questions in the last couple of days about some of these concepts, so it's pretty interesting. So when we talk about ownership, right, that community is who has that ownership of that information collectively. When we talk about control over all aspects of the research and information management processes that impact them. So to like, if you have this game plan, it's having, do you have that flexibility to understand that like if the community you're working with or an individual, like something you've planned is just not working, like can you have that flexibility to change it? And that willingness, right, to make it work. Access, must have access to information and data about themselves. And I think personally, like that means not just having to get on your email and email somebody from the research team and then wait like a week for them to send you a transcript or a document, right? Like, where's that accessibility? And possession, like are they having physical control of the data? And I can tell you right now, if I get a question about this, I'm not gonna know the answer, but I keep getting these questions, which is also something I've been asking others as well to see their input in terms of like, okay, if we're working with like a health regulatory body or we've synthesized data that would benefit health authorities, et cetera, like, do you just like hand that over, right? Like it's a big question. What if the communities don't want you to? Like it's very interesting, and I think we get into some tricky situations. But my recommendation up to this point is like I think it's that ownership and that possession. Like it comes down to who you're working with and if that's information they want to share and in what context they want to share that with, right? And then we have NAHO's 6 Principles of Métis Health Research. A lot of overlap in some of these, right? Like we're talking about reciprocal relationships, so it's not just obviously like benefiting the researcher. What is it giving to your partners? How are they benefiting from this? Respect for various aspects within the research process, so researchers who are mixed culture. A couple points down, it does mention like having this also be specific to Métis context because although Métis people are Indigenous people, in what is now called Canada, like their experience of colonization was very different than that of First Nations as well as Inuit people, right? So understanding the context of the people you're working with is really important in that sense too. Yeah, they talk about diversity around the varying belief systems of Métis people. Same thing, First Nations people, they're not all the same. Like everybody has different cultures, right? Yeah, creating safe, inclusive environments. Pretty standard stuff on this slide at this point after what we've gone through. And I'm going to refer to the Inuit principles. I'm not going to try and speak their language. I did not give myself enough time to appropriately try and say it, and I feel like it's going to be really disrespectful if I just butcher their language. So, using English, my first language, they talk about respecting others, relationships, and caring for people. They're talking about fostering good spirit by being open, welcoming and inclusive, serving and providing for family and community. So there's kind of that extension of like, what is this interaction, what is this relationship we're building, not only doing for, say, just the person or just the community, but those close to them, right? Development of skills through observation, mentoring, practice, and effort. So we saw that through FNHA recommendations, right? Like that's kind of that capacity bridging, both economic and human and skill-wise. Working together for a common cause, that's pretty straightforward. Being innovative and resourceful, again, having that adaptability, making things work. And respect and care for the land, animals, and the environment. And I would also add to that respect for the people you're working with and their relationship with the land, animals, environment. That's gonna be an important consideration. Don't worry, I'm almost done talking. You guys are so great. Oh, I was gonna say, you beat me to it again. Oh, you're so good at this. So as you hopefully saw, hopefully gathered, I also pointed out, I'm sorry, I know you're all brilliant minds. I have a small child of my own, and so I think I over-explain things at times and try to make connections for people, which I understand could be detrimental to learning. But yeah, we see some trends in these recommendations, right, despite coming from very different peoples. A lot about creating respectful and meaningful relationships and having that translate into respectful and meaningful relationships and engagements. Promoting that capacity bridging in various forms and making sure these projects are mutually beneficial. Having accountability on both sides. Really talking about that topic of like Indigenous data sovereignty, that ownership and that control, and just acknowledging how complicated that can be too, right? Like without coming up with an immediate solution, there needs to be considerations taken with that. So these are just a couple extra recommendations, but you've survived my presentation. So I'm going to pass it over to the lovely Jimena. She has put together a fun interactive component. I want to encourage you as she gets transitioned onto the slide, maybe stand up and like shake your body out if you want to, because I know you've been sitting all day. I'm going to do it. And she's going to lead you through this. She's got a case study she's put together, some interactive questions, and then we'll have time for questions and answers if you would like it. We're just stretching, Jimena. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Oh, wow. Thank you, Laura. I just like wanting to acknowledge that as we were doing this research, and not only this one, but many others in the past, like scanning what kind of documentation and training is available for cultural safety, Indigenous cultural safety. We found that there was lots of frameworks and ideas, and we found this article that like really helped us to frame this presentation that is called Weaving First Nations, Inuit and Métis Principles and Values into Health Research Processes. So we really recommend you to read this article. It's a very short one, but full of good materials, and it helps to put together all of this.
Do you want to repeat that for everybody, just so they can hear it?
Sure. The name of the article is Weaving First Nations, Inuit and Métis Principles and Values into Health Research Processes. And I might be able to copy the link and the title into the chat over here as we finish this.
Oh, yes. Hello to our online participants.
Yeah. Okay, so if you can help me with the presentation that Laura was looking at, because the case study is presented there, please. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. So this is the case study, and this is what we are going to do. What we're going to do is a trivia. We will go, as soon as I finish the case study explanation, we will go to a trivia, and there will be some questions, and you will just vote the answer that feels better to you. And as we answer this, we will be discussing. So it's very important that you participate to have some dynamic content here. So this is the case study, if you are ready. The idea is that we're talking about an Indigenous health research team. This is a group formed by students that live in an Indigenous community, and they want to create a line of natural pharmaceutical products based on their traditional herbal remedies. Next slide, please. They know that manufacturing these herbal remedies and marketing them together with courses about like wise ways of eating, traditional ways of eating, and other cultural activities and protocols can be a good source of income for the community. So there's the business model there, right? And also a good way to have the medicine available for all medicine users, and a way to train health practitioners and cultural protocols. So there are many benefits for the community, and the community has already accepted this research. So the team and the community are aligned, and they are ready to go on. Next, please. Oh, can you put the next one, please? So some considerations for this is that the team, they are like recent graduate students, so they don't have so much experience in this endeavor. And they think that it will be a good idea to hire some advisor group or like someone to help them to give answer to some of these questions, especially about clinical trials and testing according to regulations. And they want to be sure that their cultural knowledge will be safe and that participants that will be helping will be safe too, not harmed in any way. They need then concrete answers in diverse aspects, and they have hired your team or yourself to do this. So next question, please. Next slide. So now I will ask you to go to the address that you see in the screen and enter the code. And as everyone does that, I will ask David, our tech support, to please open the presentation at Menti.
There's a QR code over there if you're having trouble joining. Oh,
Thank you. So there is the code ready for everyone. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this research that this team want to do has three aspects, no? And they have certain questions for each one of these aspects. So the first one is, can you please put the next one? Is about lab testing data. So we are talking about only the lab testing data. The team want to test therapeutic properties of the native plants. They want to check chemical composition, and with that data that they take, they want to create the formulas. They already know some formulas, but they need to do all the lab testing to provide all this information to Health Canada and further on get the approval that they need. So if you put the next slide, please. The question is, they want your advice about how to choose the lab test providers that will do the testing. What recommendations can you provide? And here I need to, please, okay, thank you. So the answers that we have is, you can find for them a lab that has an outstanding reputation with Health Canada to be sure that all the tests will pass. Second option is find for them a lab managed by Indigenous peoples in their community. And if the community doesn't have a lab, they will go and find another First Nations lab. And the third one is to recommend different labs run by Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations and provide the tools to the team to evaluate and build a relationship with them. So as you see, we have some votes. And all these answers kind of depend a little bit on the situation, but according to Indigenous cultural safety, the proper thing to do is to provide them with the different possibilities that they can access, open the doors to all possibilities so that the team can take decisions individually, in autonomy, and considering what is important for them, instead of guiding them, trying to avoid a paternalistic approach into this advisory and really empowering the self-determination of each team. So let's go to the next question. The team is also interested in knowing who will own the data resulting from this testing and formulation stage according to the First Nations OCAP. So if you want to vote, so the first option is that the data should be owned by the team because they have funded and managed the research, and it's their ancestral knowledge, and they have the right to own it. The other option is the data should be owned by the Indigenous community that has kept the knowledge and cultivating the plants since time immemorial. And the third option will be it should be owned by the collective of stakeholders participating in the research, which is researchers, knowledge keepers, and the community, and each one will have a percentage. So yeah, the most adequate approach considering Indigenous cultural safety will be the second one, where the Indigenous community owns the data because it's their traditional knowledge. And even when the research team also have the right to access and use that knowledge, the knowledge is not theirs individually, so they cannot really patent or register that data. They have to go to the community, and the community is the owner of this data. Thank you. So the next one. This is the second aspect, and it's related to the formula patent. So they have finished the testing, and they want to register the formulas, right, before applying to Health Canada, and they want to protect them so that no one takes that intellectual property away. So the question and the options are the next slide, please. What will be your advice based on the First Nations principles of OCAP, Indigenous cultural safety, and other intellectual property policy about the formulas patent? Okay, this is interesting between the second and the third one. The patent of formulas should be owned individually, but by each one of the knowledge keepers that have passed them. That is not correct because they don't own the information. That's that formulas are the community's formulas, right? Like it's ancestral knowledge. It has been passed to them, and they are carriers of this knowledge. So in fact, the formulas should be owned by the community that has kept the knowledge. The second answer could also be possible. However, if we based on the OCAP, it's the community who owns it, but also the team can agree with the community a different arrangement if that is what the community wants. But the voice and the final vote is in the community and through the traditional authorities or the band council. Next one, please. So the third aspect is the patient-oriented research aspect. This aspect involves indigenous patient partners because the team, the Indigenous Health Research team, has found some community members who have lived experience with the traditional medicines. And they have also followed some cultural protocols and ceremonies, rituals, ways of eating, or traditional diets that have empowered the results of these medicines. So using qualitative data, the inquiry they want to do in this stage is to design a posology directives and the protocols for further usage. So there are two lines. One is the posology, like literally how many times per day you have to drink the medicine and which way, with water, or how is it going to be done. But also they want to create these workshops and trainings around each medicine, around each formula, where they can say before drinking the medicine, do a prayer or sing a song or whatever a protocol goes around the relation that these people have with the plants that are included in the formula. So they want to do this, and they want to ask Indigenous patients partners about their experience using this medicine. So if we go to the next, please. The first question will be, what recommendations can you provide to the team to build safe and healthy relationships with Indigenous patient partners based on these frameworks. So the first option is show reciprocity by paying honoraria, show respect by listening to their opinions and meeting at the community health center for safety. The second one will be reciprocate by paying honoraria, gifting, and other protocols, and respect by listening carefully and sharing all the results. Safe meetings will happen only in community land. And the last one is the team has to acknowledge that the knowledge keepers and patients opened this opportunity, and that has to be honored by deciding next steps together in consensus. So definitely the first one, it is a cultural safe approach, however, is not like totally embodied in the research and in the process. It's more like acknowledging them from an equity point. However, like it's not completely embedded in Indigenous cultural safety. The same with the second one. It provides meetings, it provides the gifting, it provides the reciprocity, but it's not exactly, or like it's not rounded or integrated. The third question will be, the third answer, sorry, will be the proper one, because one of the very important areas of all this research is to include Indigenous patients partners since the beginning, and also honor all the relations that are included. So the ones who opened the research were the knowledge keepers, and the medicine users are their patients, right? That's how this research team comes to them. So the first step for cultural safety inside the community, because that also applies inside the community, is to go to them, acknowledge in reciprocity the support that the team has provided, and invite them to lead that part of how these patients need to be treated, how this whole research needs to be taken to be careful. Next one, please. And lastly, the third aspect is the data ownership of patient-oriented research. So the question here, if you want to go to the next one, the question here is who owns the data resulting from this stage of patient-oriented research? So first option, the team. Second option, the Indigenous community. Or the third option is this has to be discussed between the knowledge keepers, the medicine users, and the traditional authorities in consensus. So thank you for your votes there. Like, I think any of the second and third could be good, and this depends a lot on how participatory and collective research is being done. It can be just like given to the community, or it can also be in consensus. If we go to the deep cultural safety, the ideal is to have a consensus, because in that way everyone knows where the decision comes from. Everyone has a voice, everyone has a way to share that, and then there is like autonomy in the decision and the collective framework, and that's it. Can we go to the next one? And I think we have finished. Thank you for your answer. So now we would like to open, we have 3 minutes, I guess. So if there are like some questions, I have a couple here. I don't know if there are some questions in person, and we can close the screen sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, so you can either post your questions on the WOVA app or raise your hand and wave it around a little bit, because it's quite bright in here. Or if there's any questions online.
I do have a couple of questions online.
Okay, yeah, Jimena, would you like to tackle those?
Yes, thank you. So the first one says, how can non-Indigenous researchers ensure the cultural safety of their Indigenous colleagues when collaborating? Like, I can jump for this one. I think the first step in my experience and learning, is cultural humility. It's okay to not know. It also happens with gender minorities and other minorities. We just don't know sometimes. Like, we cannot know all the intersections that are possible, but we can know that our culture is not the only one, and that our perspective is not the only one, and that what I have to say is as valuable as the others. So I think like I don't know approach could be like the first step. So if you have colleagues in your research team or in the work who comes from Indigenous communities, I would totally recommend to come from a cultural humility place where you say like, hey, I don't know anything about your community. Can you share something about it so that I can know better how to approach, because I wouldn't like to commit mistakes. And then you open the opportunity to the other to express their truth and their intersection and how they see their culture, and you learn, and you open a relation of mutual and honest understanding. So that will be my answer. I don't know if somebody else wants to say something about this.
Yeah, and I think I want to just add on to that quickly. I think it's kind of that humility sense too. Like, I think we should be striving to ensure that like we can make things culturally safe, but like simultaneously, like I don't think there's like 100% guarantee, right? So I think that was a great approach you brought up. Coming to sessions like this, doing that personal work, right? Like, there's so many resources out there. I don't know if you've heard, but we have a podcast. And in one episode, I sit down with Harley Eagle, and it was honestly like, it's like an hour and 20 minutes. I pre-warn you. That was a long one. But he talks so much about this, and yeah, there's so many amazing like Indigenous people out there doing cultural safety, cultural humility work. We see with like the integration in your organization, like at that level, like prior to even engaging with like Indigenous colleagues or partners in projects, we're seeing at the organizational level, like by having people like Ashlyn come in and set that framework and start working on answering those questions too. She has her own distinct role, like she's being paid for that. You're appreciating someone for their knowledge coming in, and she's working to kind of start that step, right, of like, okay, what do we need to do to make sure this is a safe spot? So yeah, you can also acknowledge like, hey, I don't know how to do this, but then taking that step. And again, this is before you're even making those engagements by working with people like her, right? Research Decolonized. I think Hartley's is like episode 5. I can't remember. Yeah, feel free to get ready to listen to me talk, but for a while. No, but they're all great. Everybody I've talked to has been great. We're talking about like research projects, et cetera, experiences of amazing Indigenous scholars and trainees as they're working within like colonial structures. But his episode really, like, he unfolded his experience too as himself doing that work. And in there I ask him, like, how do you do this work all the time? Like, how are you not impatient, or like, how do you care for yourself? And he breaks that all down. And he talks about those preliminary steps of kind of what you should and could be doing prior to that engagement occurring.
Awesome. I have another question come in on the app here. Really surrounding the burden that's placed upon Indigenous peoples when we're seeking to create culturally safe spaces. And so the question is, how much of this research and learning should we be doing on our own versus asking for input, time, and energy from Indigenous folks?
Jimena, can I jump on that again? Can I jump on that one?
You are on that.
Oh, right. She's like, you've already started talking, Laura. Yeah, fair. So also check out that episode from Harley Eagle. He talks about this, that there's that conversation, right? And I think I can do this work in specific contexts. When I'm not doing this work, when I'm doing it as kind of my side hustle, I like to incorporate arts-based activities, not just for everybody else's benefit, because I think moving and having that thing, but for myself, like, it's just a nice neutral environment, but to actually not neutral, but safer environment. To talk about answering that question, I think it's just, I think everybody needs to take their own degree of ownership, right? Like you've seen, they've hired committees of brilliant people synthesizing these documents, releasing it. And I do understand information overload. I do understand everybody's really busy and it takes a lot of time, and you don't want to read every single document out there. But I think everybody does need to put, like with myself, with other things I have to learn about with different peoples, like I have to ask those questions myself and start doing that research. But again, I'm like, is this going to be my cookie or cutter response? Hiring people who do this work, right? Like, and they come in, and Harley Eagle talks about that too. But again, people like Ashlyn, right? Like, so people who don't want to do the work or are like, I'm out of capacity for the work, I think a lot of them will be comfortable enough to tell you. So do your own work. Try to go to different workshops. Try to hear these different yet kind of relaying similar information perspectives. But exactly that, like having that organizational and like systemic accountability so that to your workers, yourself as an employee of an organization, can take those right steps. Because I know it can be uncomfortable. And I think for myself with other individuals with like diverse lifestyles from my own, like I've been really fortunate to be around people who've like taught me with that, and I've also been pretty confident to like ask some questions. But I find too there is that always worry, right, of not wanting to overburden people. So finding that balance.
I would like to ask, like to add something to this. It's a little different approach because in my experience as Indigenous health research facilitator, working with organizations that come from Indigenous communities, from their very diverse realities and standpoints, for Indigenous perspectives, relation is first of all. That's why we have like self-location to start, like who are you coming from? Where are you coming from? Who are you? Kind of thing, right? And for me, in relation with researchers from these communities, the personal relation is very important. And we have to come with humility. For me, as a non-English speaker, it's a big privilege, right? Because I come like with a humble place where sometimes I don't even like pronounce properly. So that gives the other side a little bit of comfort, saying like, okay, if I don't do it good, then you don't do it good, and it's okay if we don't do it perfect. So we start from this place of human needs, of togetherness, like, who are you? Why are you interested in this knowledge? Like, what are you gonna do with that? What are your values? What are we talking about? Because we are different cultures and we come from different perspectives and paradigms, right? What is important for you? What is important for me? And just like doing these questions, we can build a very respectful relation and we can know better. Because if we only approach to Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous research and communities from books and workshops, we lose the human part. And then we cannot touch and tap into the real historical situation, right? When you in person say a comment without knowing that you're going to affect someone and you make a situation where the other cries, it's not like going to a workshop and say like, oh, you just have to avoid these words. It's just like feeling deeply where the wounds are. And then it's more understandable how to approach this person, to approach the community and understand where the wounds are and where we have to step carefully. And it's different in each community and it's different for each person. So I will just invite you all to become friends with some Indigenous person and have these deep conversations, because yeah, even when there is burden and a lot of like noise around it, the conversations, they need to happen, especially if we pretend to access the knowledge that they have, because for Indigenous peoples, knowledge is not something that you own or that you get or that you access, or that you purchase. Knowledge is something that you access And knowledge, you can access it through your relation with the community and through your relation with the cosmovision and even your relation with creator and all the energies, like the trees, like everything that is important for that. So if you speak wrong about the bears and you're in a community, bear clan community, it will not be easy. But how can you know if they are bear clan if you don't ask? Because in the workshop, you will not know this. You have to ask also the human part. Yeah, sorry, too long, but that's important.
Thank you, Jimena. That was wonderful. We have 1 minute and 30 seconds to go. And so this last question is far too big for that, but maybe I'll have both of you end on a similar note, and that would be, what would be something that comes to the top of your mind that would be a really positive environment that an organization needs to have to engage with Indigenous partners and communities? And just quickly off the top of your head, or or if you have a positive note or something, maybe we can end on that. Jimena, I see you raising a...
Yeah, you can use frameworks such as third space, intercultural collaboration spaces. There are frameworks, it's called shared spaces, safe spaces, third spaces. It's kind of a circle where we agree in not harming, in which are the values, which are the rules that we are going to use in this circle to communicate. And it changes every time with each community that you work with. So yeah, just like if you want to search more, it's third space for intercultural collaboration. That's kind of the name of these frameworks. Mm-hmm.
Amazing, thanks. And any closing comments or thoughts to add?
I was going to be cheeky and be like, yeah, just listen to Harley Eagle's episode, right? Like, it's good points. Yeah, again, I think I just come back to that whole, I almost forgot the question, so I'm going to pretend I remember it completely to answer it. Yeah, those initial frameworks, right? Like, from the start, have that inclusion and have it be meaningful, right? Like, we're not tickety boxing, we're not tokenizing. We actually are engaging people, compensating them for their time and energy, implementing people like Ashlyn ahead of the time, right? To ensure that before you even make those steps, you're doing it in like a respectful way, and being okay with, not okay in the sense of like, if we mess up, we mess up, but being okay understanding like once in a while you might mess up, and hoping that the people who are there to correct you are doing so gracefully and kindly. But sometimes they don't, and then you're like, ouch, but you learn it and you remember it because it hurt a little bit, right? So yeah, thank you everyone for coming out and putting up with me talking at you for 20 minutes. And also the participation was fun to see on Jimena's activity. Loved that, was watching the little scales there. Was very impressed with everybody's answers.
Yeah, just, I guess, put your hands together for Jimena and Laura. This is just, thanks for bringing us together. And with that, we end this afternoon session. And we're all tired, so that's good.
You made it through the entire day. Yeah.
Except for the last bit, there's more.